Assalamualaikum. In the previous video, we have just discussed कि hypothalamus से gonadotropin releasing hormone आया, pituitary anterior pituitary से FSH and LH आया, and it acts on the ovaries and causes it to release the estrogen and progesterone. Mainly, ovaries do not release estrogen and progesterone. There are various follicles in the ovaries that during the normal menstrual period release the estrogen and progesterone. Now, the FSH. Remember that anterior pituitary mainly releases FSH in a large amount and LH in a relatively small amount. So this FSH from the anterior pituitary comes to the ovaries, and inside the ovaries the cycle is running, and that cycle is the this cycle. And here remember that there is a primordial follicle initially. After that it is converted into primary follicle, and then comes the secondary follicle. Secondary follicle के बाद एक tertiary follicle आता है. Just keep yourself to the tertiary follicle right now. Now, try to understand that after the birth of a female, her ovaries contain a lot of thousands of almost thousands of primordial follicles, and whenever puberty comes, these primordial follicles on each and every month, on average 15 primordial follicles every month spontaneously start converting into the primary follicles. याद रखें कि puberty आने पे हर month जब भी female का menstrual cycle कंटिन्यू होना होता है, मेंस्ट्रुअल साइकिल स्टार्ट होता है, या मेंस्ट्रुअल साइकिल के पहले चंद एक दिनों में क्या होता है कि 15 से 20 प्राइमोडियल फॉलिकल्स खुद ब खुद प्राइमरी फॉलिकल्स में कन्वर्ट होना शुरू हो जाते हैं. दे डू नॉट नीड एनी स्टिमुलस एट ऑल, they are themselves being converted into the primary follicles. But that FSH which is coming from the anterior pituitary actually acts on these primary follicles. They act on these primary follicles and causes their conversion into the secondary follicles. We need FSH at this step. If there is no FSH, then there will be no continuation of the menstrual cycle. Now just remember that FSH when comes, it causes the formation of the secondary follicle. I want to clear some other things here, that primary like you can see here, this is the primordial follicle. It contains this primary oocyte, and around it flat layer of cells is present. These are granulosa cells. But in the primary follicle, these granulosa cells which were initially flat here are now converted into the cuboidal cells, right? After that it becomes multilaminar. This layer was unilaminar and it now has become multilaminar. How it has become multilaminar? That a layer of theca cells has also come around the granulosa cells. Now this is the again the primary follicle. After that when FSH comes, it converts primary follicle into the secondary follicle, and the secondary follicle now contains a fluid filled cavity here. And this was again the primary oocyte. These are the granulosa cells, but here a fluid filled cavity is formed. It is early antral stage. A small cavity is formed around it. There is theca cells layer. Theca cells layer also has been divided into theca interna and theca externa, right? After that comes the tertiary or Graafian follicular stage, in which a large fluid filled cavity is formed, and again this is the oocyte. But now around the oocyte another layer, that is zona pellucida layer. This is nothing but a glycoprotein layer. It also has been formed, but this zona pellucida layer has got a lot of importance because it prevents polyspermy, कि एक से ज़्यादा sperm को primary oocyte के साथ fuse नहीं होने देता. That is why it prevents it is responsible for preventing the polyspermy. सो आपने इसको याद रखना है. अभी तक मैंने आपको ये बताया कि प्राइमोडियल फॉलिकल प्राइमरी फॉलिकल में कन्वर्ट होता है इटसेल्फ विदाउट एनी स्टिमुलस एट ईच एंड एवरी मंथ. एट द स्टार्ट ऑफ द मेंस्ट्रुअल साइकिल प्राइमोडियल फॉलिकल खुद ब खुद प्राइमरी फॉलिकल्स में कन्वर्ट होना शुरू हो जाते हैं, लेकिन प्राइमरी फॉलिकल्स को सेकेंडरी फॉलिकल्स में कन्वर्ट होने के लिए FSH की ज़रूरत होती है. आफ्टर दैट सेकेंडरी फॉलिकल्स, इनका स्ट्रक्चर भी मैंने बता दिया. वैसे आपके साथ इतना कंसर्न्ड नहीं है कि क्या स्ट्रक्चर होता है, लेकिन स्टिल मैंने आपको इनका थोड़ा बहुत स्ट्रक्चर बता दिया है. ओके, now what happens that when just focus on this structure now, just focus on the secondary follicle now. Here you can see that whenever FSH comes, okay, FSH has come, this theca layer actually responds to LH. This theca layer responds to LH and granulosa cell layer. These are granulosa cells and they respond mainly to the FSH. Remember it as well. Whenever FSH and LH, they both are released whenever like LH came and it just stimulated this theca cell layer. This theca cell layer then releases a hormone that is androgen. Okay, that is androgen. These androgens will go to the granulosa cells, and under the influence of FSH, these granulosa cells will convert this androgen coming from the theca cell layer into estrogen. Right? क्या हुआ कि LH आया, उसने थीका लेयर को स्टिमुलेट किया, थीका लेयर से एंड्रोजेंस रिलीज हुए, एंड्रोजेंस ग्रेनुलोजा सेल्स के पास के, और अंडर द इन्फ्लुएंस ऑफ एफएसएच ग्रेनुलोजा सेल्स ने एंड्रोजेंस को ईस्ट्रोजन में कन्वर्ट कर दिया, एंड द कन्वर्जन ऑफ एंड्रोजन इनटू estrogen requires a enzyme that is aromatase enzyme, right? Okay, so this is happening in the follicular phase. Now what happens that when estrogen is released from this granulosa cell layer, estrogen levels are increasing, right? This estrogen is going to two structures. Number one, it is going to hypothalamus, and it is giving the signals that no more FSH is needed. So it results in the decreased production of FSH from the hypothalamus and pituitary. And on the other hand, this estrogen also goes to the uterus. It goes to the uterus and tells the uterus that there are chances of coming the zygote. ये जाता है एस्ट्रोजन यूट्रस के पास, उसको बताता है कि जाइगोट आने के चांसेस हैं, तुम अपनी तैयारी कर लो, यू हैव टू प्रिपेयर योर सेल्फ. एस्ट्रोजन टेल्स द यूट्रस दैट zygote can come because ovulation will occur, and if sperm will come, then obviously zygote will form. So estrogen signals the uterus to prepare itself for the implantation of the zygote. So at that time, in the uterus, proliferative phase is running and the uterus is preparing itself. It is increasing its glands in number. It is increasing its stroma. Both the glandular structures and stroma is being increased in the follicular, in the proliferative phase, right? Okay. After that, what happens that because FSH secretion has been reduced from the hypothalamus because of decreased FSH secretion, अब हमारे पास क्या होता है, मैंने आपको स्टार्ट में कहा कि बहुत सारे 15 तकरीबन प्राइमोडियल फॉलिकल प्राइमरी फॉलिकल्स में कन्वर्ट हो रहे होते हैं. अब FSH आ रहा होता है, many of them are being converted from primary follicles to the secondary follicles. So there are many secondary follicles, or there are many follicles, but we need only one follicle. We need only one follicle so that it can ovulate, and we need only one egg at right time. That is why it is necessary, when FSH signals are reduced from the hypothalamic pituitary axis, then there is attrition, there is atresia of all these other follicles, and only one follicle will remain, that is the dominant follicle. Only that follicle will remain and the rest will undergo atresia. And that dominant follicle has which features? That dominant follicle has some features like mm, the dominant follicle has very efficient aromatase activity, and it has very high concentration of LH receptors, and it will cause that follicle to survive, and the remaining follicles will just undergo atresia. So अब हमारे पास सिर्फ एक फॉलिकल बच गया है जो कि ग्रो करेगा, एंड दैट डोमिनेंट फॉलिकल, कंसीडर दिस इज दैट डोमिनेंट फॉलिकल. दिस डोमिनेंट फॉलिकल will then continue to release estrogen. It will continue to increase estrogen, and I have told you in the previous video about the relationship that whenever estrogen levels are increased very much, it results in the increased production of LH, right? I have told it to you people before in the previous video कि जब भी एस्ट्रोजन के लेवल्स बहुत ज़्यादा हो जाते हैं तो फिर वो एलएच की प्रोडक्शन को बढ़ाने लग जाता है. एलएच की प्रोडक्शन जो है वो हमारे पास बढ़ना शुरू हो जाती है, एंड दिस इज़ द पेरी ओवुलेटरी फेज. Follicular phase is of approximately we can say that follicular phase is of 14 days. After that comes the periovulatory phase. Now LH surge has been increased, and this LH surge is the मेन सर्च. कि अगर आपने देखना है कि किसी फीमेल में ओवुलेशन हो चुकी है या नहीं हो चुकी है, ऑब्वियसली अगर किसी में ओवुलेशन हुई है या होने वाली है तो उसमें एलएच सर्च बहुत ज़्यादा इंक्रीज होगा. तो आप एलएच के लेवल्स को यूरिन में देखकर ये प्रिडिक्ट कर सकते हो कि उस फीमेल के अंदर ओवुलेशन हो चुकी है या होने वाली है. सो इट इज़ द बेस्ट प्रिडिक्टर ऑफ द ओवुलेशन, राइट? So LH surge just increases prior to the ovulation, and that is why के LH surge के तकरीबन हम कह सकते हैं after 24 to 36 hours of LH surge ovulation occurs and ovum is released. Okay, now just look at this picture. Here you can see that this is the ovary. I have drawn the ovary, and this is primary oocyte, Around it there is the zona pellucida, and after that comes the layer of the corona radiata. Right after that, this is the corona radiata, and this is the layer of granulosa cells. Remember, this is the layer of granulosa cells. And after that comes a layer of theca cells. Theca cells. These are the theca cells. So I have drawn here mainly the Graafian follicle or the tertiary follicle. Whenever LH surge comes, what happens that this Graafian follicle actually forms a stigma, actually forms a protrusion over the surface of the ovary like this. I have not drawn it very well, but consider a stigma is formed over the ovary, and after LH surge, this particular structure is just released out of the ovary, but only this portion is released outside. Like consider, I will draw it again here for you. This is the primary oocyte. Around it is zona pellucida, and around it is the layer of the this is the corona radiata. This structure is mainly released outside, and the remaining structure, which is in purple color and which is in black color, this structure is retained inside the ovary, and this is mainly called the corpus luteum. And this structure that is released here, this is the ovum, and it will obviously go into the fallopian tube, and it will try to implant into the uterus if this sperm comes. But if this sperm doesn't come, then the ovum is destroyed and there is no implantation into the uterus, right? So the structure which has been remained here, this one and this one, it is actually a yellowish colored structure, and this is known as corpus luteum. Why it is called corpus luteum? Lutein means fat cells. It actually contains the fat cells, it contains the fatty globules, and it is responsible. This yellow colored structure is responsible for the production of the progesterone. Right? It is responsible for the production of progesterone. Now, remember that progesterone, we have studied in the previous relations that whenever progesterone levels are increased and increased, this corpus luteum will continue to produce progesterone, and whenever progesterone levels are increased very much, they causes inhibition of FSH and LH release. Now, there is no FSH and LH release at all from the anterior pituitary. Okay, now this corpus luteum will also continue to produce progesterone, but this luteal phase also lasts for 14 days. If there is no sperm, there is no fertilization, then its life is only for 14 days. It will produce progesterone for 14 days, and after that there is no signals of its survival, and it ultimately regresses, and it results in the formation of whitish colored structure. This yellowish colored structure is converted into the after that it is converted into the whitish colored structure, so it is known as corpus albicans. Actually, the signal after pregnancy, beta hcg is released from the female's placenta or trophoblast, etc., and that beta hcg is responsible for giving signals to this corpus luteum that it has to survive and it has to maintain the pregnancy and it has to continue releasing progesterone. But there is no pregnancy, no beta hcg, no survival of the corpus luteum, and it is converted into a whitish color structure, that is the corpus albicans.